ladies and gentlemen. So there's one thing that I haven't really looked into yet, which is Kansas City's streetcars. So we're going to do that today. I'm on this KCBackstories.com, and they've got this little two-part article that I'm going to be reading from. This is about the best thing that I could find as far as information goes. You know, instead of jumping around to 15 different places, they've got quite a bit jam-packed into this, as well as a little bit of, other things that they add into these articles. A writer's touch, if you would like to call it. But look at this photo here. What's going on? What are we doing? Forcing this poor horsey to pull this cart around for these stupid people? What is the deal? I'm not seeing a track. So is this just a wagon that's been fabricated to look like a streetcar? I'm not really sure what's going on here. Younger or newer Kansas Cityans may only know it as the Trolley Track Trail. Longtime residents know it as the Country Club District Streetcar Line, South Kansas City's connection to the early local rail system. And to those long gone, it was a reason to speculate on land or build a business or a home or find a memory. For more than 150 years, this narrow strip of easement has played a part in the growth of every place between Westport south to Dodson at 85th and Prospect. In all these forms, the story that the rail has found a place in the books I have written about South Kansas City. For the 4 weeks in November, I'm sharing some of that HisssStory that's been included in those books, with a few edits for length and a bit of updating. This week's entry is from the Waldo story. Keep in mind, guys, I am reading something that somebody else has written. We will be getting to some information shortly, hopefully. Did a quick skim on this, but I did not read it in its entirety. Kansas City's existence was rooted in the network of wagon trails that had moved the nation westward. But the wagons did not secure its permanence. Steam locomotion would do that. The rails would be Kansas City's ticket to the future. Even before the Civil Theater, Kansas City's most prominent and influential citizens were planning for the bigger role they wanted the city to play in the nation's economy. The railroads have been stretching west for years. As early as the 1830s, political interests in Missouri were chartering railroads, albeit many that were never built. Those that were built, however, were largely short-line railroads that connected markets in larger towns with those of small and scattered nearby communities. The Tebow and Neosho once connected Neosho and Sedalia in Missouri. The Joplin Rail Company connected that town to Girard, Kansas, 42 miles west. And somewhere around 1865, a short freight line rail was built connecting Westport, still an independent town, with the area known as Dodson near 85th and Prospect, by way of just 8 miles of track. Too many events conspired to keep progress from moving forward very rapidly, economic downturns and the Civil Theater among them. But as times improved and the vision of a rail system began to emerge, towns north of the Missouri River were well positioned to take advantage. Cities on the south side, including and especially Kansas City, faced one major obstacle. No railroad had yet bridged the Missouri River, nor seemed inclined to do so. It would be up to the vested interests in Kansas City to find a way to connect their city to the railroad. The way, they decided, was that bridge. Now, all that was left was to conceive a railroad that building a bridge would make money. It was a monumental task. I gotta tell you guys, I am definitely not somebody that should be judging anybody's works, but this person's writing here, I just can't get down with it. The competition by those railroads interested was narrowed to Kansas City and Leavenworth, Kansas. After the wars, Leavenworth's population was larger, and the city considered more civilized. Say what? After the wars, Leavenworth's population was larger. That's a very interesting statement there. But I shall continue. Kansas City had earned a broad reputation as filthy, backward, and still sympathetic to the South. It took a great deal of civic aggrandizement. I have never heard that word before. What are we talking about? Increase the power, status, or wealth of, and the assistance of former newspaperman, mayor, and now U.S. Congressman Robert Van Horn to pull it off, but in the end, Kansas City won. Sorry for I am a freak about definitions and context, or try to be. Of course, occasionally I'm wrong as well. The Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad would build a bridge across the Missouri River, leading straight south into the heart of Kansas City. In 1870, the year after the bridge opened, Kansas City's population jumped to an astounding 32,000. Development in the city exploded, but the result was chaos. Womp, womp, womp. Kansas City sprawled out, and as it did, it took the bedlam and muck and the tribulations of a growing city with it. Adding to the chaos, even as it became essential to the life of the city, independent urban lines sprung up around the area. Most ran east to west along the south bank of the Missouri, connecting Kansas City to Independence and all the sprawling areas in between. But there was a cluster of growth south of Westport, already connected to a short freight line that ran to the south. Nehemiah Holmes came to Kansas City before the Civil Theater from New York, where he had run a store. In Kansas City, he found success working in insurance and finance. Oh, another insurance boy. Nothing in his background suggested to anyone with capital or influence that Holmes knew anything about transportation. Well, considering that he ran a store, worked in insurance and finance, one would expect that he did not know anything about transportation. But he was smart and persuasive. Holmes saw in that route south of Westport a new opportunity. 5 months before the Hannibal Bridge was officially opened, Holmes incorporated the Kansas City and Westport Horse Railroad Company. Oh, well, guess we've got somebody to blame for abusing these horsies exclusively for the purpose of transportation, not people. 2 years later, Holmes opened the route to operation, first working the Westport to downtown connection, then 2 years later, extending service to the south. Could somebody please explain to me exactly what a horse railroad is? Or what it means to be exclusively for the purpose of transportation, not people. Meanwhile, far to the south, the Missouri Pacific Railroad was completing its plan to reach western Missouri and ultimately connecting its line to the old freight line running north to Westport. The connection would be at Dodson, and the connecting railroad was incorporated as the Kansas City and Westport Belt Railroad. I keep wanting to say railroad. The connection would be at Dodson, and the connecting railroad was incorporated as the Kansas City and Westport Belt Railway Company. But over the years, it would be known mostly as the Dodson Dummy Line. The term was a common one in places where steam locomotives used the same track as passenger service. That's a new one to me. Dummy referred to the practice of making the small steam engines look like anything but what they were, which was noisy and smelly, prone to frightening horses. Dummy line engines were muffled and dressed up to look more like streetcars than trains, hence the name Dummy. I guess maybe that's what we were looking at on that very first photo at the tippy top of this article. Let's check out this map real quick while we're here. Pretty crummy map we got going on. Not a single flippin' street name or number to be had. Got a David Waldo in this Sector 8 here. Well, that's not of much use to us. We'll be looking for some older photos and better maps here shortly. In the spring of 1894, the owners of the railroad, now called the Kansas City Electric Railway, changed the name to Westport and Waldo Railroad. An 1894 article in the Westport Centennial Examiner explained the change. The old name did not locate the road. Kansas City is the best and most taken name on the American continent, and it should be not taken in vain and applied in such a way as to be misleading. Westport may not be quite as well known as Kansas City, but when the home seeker reaches the latter place, every good real estate agent will at once advise him to locate his wife and children in Westport, where there is an abundance of pure air and southern breezes. Well, I can testify that my year or two as a bachelor living in Westport was not a very pleasant one. It was give and take, I guess. The main unpleasant thing being the crime. Understandably, the Westport Centennial Examiner was in the business of promoting Westport. But that didn't matter to those at the other end of the line. It was the Westport and Waldo Railroad. Waldo was officially on the map and had not one but two railroads. The freight line connected to the Missouri Pacific gave every farmer and craftsman in the area the option to ship goods to Westport or anywhere else they could reach by rail. And Holmes' old passenger line serviced the area's passengers, taking them to any spot in the city the interurban lines reached. So now we're back to Mr. Holmes and his horse-drawn rail, and they are transporting passengers. So I'm not really sure what that other sentence in question earlier was about. Large parcels were split and acres purchased by those hoping to capitalize on the proximity to the rail. As Waldo approached the turn of the century, the folks who lived there were excited about their prospects. They were riding the rails into a horizon they could not yet clearly see, but that could only be better than the bloody border was still fresh in their memories. Yes, just one example of the types of businesses who benefited from being proximate to the freight line in Waldo. The photo, taken in 1940, shows a building materials business operating there since 1885. And that uses an old boxcar for storage. Not seeing this boxcar. Featured photo. Nehemiah Holmes, original Kansas City and Westport Horse Railway car, the passenger service that could ultimately run from Westport south to Brookside, Waldo, and Dotson, and take on the name Westport and Waldo Railway. So yeah, I don't know what the pump fake was all about as far as the not people line was. Obviously, this is for transporting humans. Anyways, I always just find these ridiculous. But there's a part 2 to this. I'm trying to decide if I want to go ahead and do that or just check out some photos and then do a part 2 later. Alright, so I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and jump into part 2 of this article. There's still some information or his story to be had here. But before we do, I'm going to take a little intermission and we're going to do a little search for some old photos of the streetcars, etc. So part of this map might look familiar to you, but something I thought was interesting on this is this little electric roads and cable. So I'm not really sure what they mean exactly by electric roads, but okay, so we're looking at the solid black, assuming that's the electric car system. And then these dotted lines over here, which are mostly on the outskirts, seem to be cable drawn. Interesting stuff. Look at this grid. crazy. There's the Missouri River. And the Kansas River's over here. And I wasn't seeing a date on this anywhere. Not sure if this will tell me. Does not look like it. I'm not really sure. I'll give you a whole lot of information. This is some sort of... Apparently you can have this printed on a pillow or a man bag. Here's a photo said to be an 1887 8th Street Tunnel, Kansas City downtown. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here. 1887. Look how deteriorated everything looks already in this early time. I mean, what are we talking about here? Interesting little steel building over on the left side. What's this gentleman up to? He's just hanging out, loitering. I don't know, the impression that I get from, the suspicious characters that we see in a lot of these old photographs is that they seem to be like guarding certain structures or areas, etc. Maybe for the inheritors, or maybe the people were slowly let back into certain areas after they could go in there and clean everything up and hide the evidence. I don't know, it's just a theory of mine, a working theory. And by the way, this search is completely polluted by, guess what? The new streetcar. That's right. Now we've decided we need a streetcar again. If you guys remember or have seen my last Boots on the Ground video, I had a little B-roll on the bike and I rolled through one of these streetcar stations. Not a flippin' soul to be seen anywhere around there. Just a complete waste. But I'll leave that rant for another time. 1890, The Junction, Kansas City downtown. And these ones, duck, duck, go. They like to pull a bunch of stuff up from Pinterest, which I cannot access without an account. Or, I can't click on them and get a good view, but so trying to do the best I can. I guess I could save them to the desktop and go that route, but just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. What do we got going on here? Look at this structure in the middle. There's no way this exists any longer. I would definitely remember seeing this. Streets look muddy. Willing to bet money that there are bricks under the mud. And, same as the last photo, nothing here is bright and shiny, new looking. Kansas City is said to have been founded around the 1830s. I don't know, 60 years later. Holy cow, I just noticed the tower on this structure right here. It was hard to see because it blends in with the background, of course. Wow. Yeah, this definitely does not exist anymore. And for obvious reasons. I mean, we've got this grand structure here. Who knows when they would tell you that it was built. And we're still mucking around in dirt and mud. Like, what are we talking about exactly? That's insanity. And it's distraction time. We're back on this Curious KC, the self-proclaimed searchers of his story. What's the earliest known photo of Kansas City? They've got some interesting stuff going on here. Just did a quick scan. I'm not going to spend a ton of time because obviously we are off subject. But I like distractions. Main Street, 1864. Just your average cattle town here. Nothing to see. Coates Homestead, 1868. Looks like they've got quite the setup going on. I'm not sure who the Coates are. I'll have to look into them. Public Square, 1870. Hold on. I just saw this. Coates was a colonel in the Missouri militia during the Civil Theater. But of course he was. And I guess this is the River Market. Another area we need to investigate. Broadway Boulevard, 1870. Now this one I find particularly interesting because of the land and what is going on here. What's the house and this fence doing way up here and the streets down here? Very bizarre. Looks like there's a bell tower or something poking out back here. Is it buried or is it just a really short tower sitting on top of here? What's going on? Very interesting stuff. You know, these people, they don't even know what they're looking at. Like, they put these photos up here, and I guess this is normal to them. Like, what happened here? Moving on. West Bottoms. Do believe we have seen this photo before. Not very good. To be completely honest, I don't know. I guess this could be part of the West Bottoms. Seeing a lot of RP people type structures in here and not the amazing brick buildings that we looked at when I did an exploration down there. There's a few in here, but it's a pretty big area, so... Oh, what do you know? Mr. Holmes again. Man sitting near bluffs, 1870. Is that a natural rock formation? Man wearing a distinct black top hat sits on the bluff overlooking Main Street between 2nd and 3rd Streets. Steamboats, 1880. Also in the river market, there's the Steamboat Arabia. Something else we need to look at. I haven't been down there, or at least in the steamboat narrative area. My gosh, probably since I was a child. Kansas City skyline, 1895. Look at these homes. Of course, no neighborhood is complete without a church or cathedral or whatever you would like to call it every 3 to 5 blocks. Totally necessary for religions. Alright, so I've jumped over to the goggles to see what they have to offer as far as images go. I've stumbled onto this Clio Kansas City Streetcar HisssStory tour. And check this out. What brought me here was this postcard of the junction once again. 9th and Main. They give you a view, a street view of this area today. And guess what? This glorious old world structure no longer exists. Sorry, I'm trying to get you a view here. And now we got these brutalist turds. There's the new streetcar line. Gosh, look at what they've done to this place. It's disgusting. Also, this Arabia Steamboat Museum is on this tour. We're going to look into his story on that as well because it is very interesting. Here's a photo of the excavation. Pretty wild. But that's enough of the distractions. We are going to jump into part 2. of the train out of Westport, the Country Club Streetcar line. And I still haven't seen or been able to give credit to whoever has written this. Maybe LaDene Morton? I'm not sure. Last week's post covered the first of 4 pieces on the origins of today's trolley track trail. The growth in Kansas City's late 19th century gave rise to a small railroad that connected Westport to Waldo and beyond, a line that would continue to be influenced for more than a century. By the mid-1890s, the Westport and Waldo Railroad had made a significant impact on the developments south of Brush Creek even before it was connected to the city's growing interurban rail system. This week takes us to the early 20th century when J.C. Nichols was beginning the development of the Country Club District, a defining project in 20th century development, and the role that the Little Railroad played. This week's entry is largely from the Brookside story, augmented by select photographs from the Country Club District of Kansas City. J.C. Nichols knew the motor car was the vehicle taking America to the future. Building quality roads in the Country Club District was a priority. He was involved in the City Beautiful movement and worked with famed planner and landscape architect George Kessler on both his own residential projects and larger civic endeavors. Brookside was designed to be auto-friendly. As early as 1920, Nichols published a map of the scenic route through the Country Club District with the suggestion, put this map in the pocket of your automobile for use the next time you are pleasure driving. This is said to be J.C. Nichols' first development. Bismarck Place, circa 1905, was serviced by a small set of shops at 51st and Oak. We were just around that area the other day on my Explorer. Another one of these janky limestone foundations, it looks like. I mean, what are we talking about here? This is a new development? His first development? I'm calling bullshit. This is the same man that we are alleging went on to develop the Country Club Plaza. The rail just beyond the far side of the building, right in 1919, the new Brookside building is under construction at 63rd and Brookside Boulevard. You don't say. These must be the 2 tracks that we ran across. Not the same street, but... So this is the toothpick structure we are constructing. The new Brookside building. So this is 63rd Street. Trying to picture this area in my head. No, it's not gonna let me zoom in any further on this photo. We've got a stack of something over here next to the dirt street. I was trying to figure out these houses back here, but those styles do not look familiar to me. Built in 1905 when he started his first development, Bismarck Place, near 50th and Main, roads suitable for automobiles were still in the future. The development was just south of Brush Creek, where roads were rough with wagon routes, and there was no bridge across the creek. Any trip to Westport, the nearest commercial area, required fording the creek in wagon or on foot. Neither was in keeping with the quality of neighborhoods to which Nichols aspired. I guess that's their explanation for the dirt roads that we are seeing. I don't know. I've never developed a neighborhood, but it seems like you'd lay out the streets first and then build the structures. I'd also like to point out that we have looked at Brush Creek, and it is apparently, or was at one point in time, completely built out by somebody, and there are ancient looking bridges that cross this alleged creek. But moving on, evidence of the train's route in Westport is visible today at the intersection of Mill Street and 42nd, where a triangle of steel rails makes for a bumpy drive. Mill Street and 42nd. I'll have to put that in the old mental notebook. It follows the line of Mill Street southeast behind the Embassy Suites Hotel. From there, a bridge, no longer there, sliced diagonally across Broadway and then 43rd Street. Then followed the eastern bridge of Mill Creek Park. See, like that sentence right there, just a complete cluster F. Sorry, author. The line continued across Main Street at the south end of the commercial strip on the west side of Main Street, then across 47th Street through what is today the parking lot west of Winstead's. From there, it crossed the creek and Volker Boulevard to where the trolley track trail begins today at Volker Boulevard and continues down the east side of Brookside Boulevard and then southward through Waldo to Dotson. The Nichols Company's use of the area's rail system is an early example of how technology of the day played a role in the district's development. In 1906, Nichols and other investors bought the Westport to Waldo Railway with a dual purpose in mind. By buying the line, they intended to eliminate the freight traffic nuisance and turn the line into a line that exclusively would serve passengers. Once acquired, the Nichols Group then sold the line back to the Metropolitan Street Railway Company, which operated the city's system. The group had two requirements. The system must be electrified, as it was the national trend, and they wanted freight service discontinued. They were successful in the first, and in fact, the line was electrified by 1907, at least as far as south. All right, I'm going to help him out here. At least as far south as 75th Street and Warnell Road in Waldo. Oh, I guess I'm not really understanding this. In one sentence, we're being told that this was an early example how technology of the day played a role in the district's development, which, I was assuming that they were meaning they were able to transport, building materials and goods. And then in another sentence, they wanted to make this exclusively for passenger transport. And then this Metropolitan Street Company sold this to the Nichols Group, and then the Nichols Group sold this back to the Metropolitan Street Railway Company under the conditions that it would be electrified and the freight service would be discontinued. I don't know what kind of strong arm stuff is going on with that, but on the second requirement, they were not successful. It's not apparent whether the Nichols Consortium was aware of the fact that the line they purchased actually had two rights of way attached to it. It was one thing to own the rails on which the cars run. The real value, however, was in the rights to use those rails, because the rail had been used over the last 30 years by two different services. There were two rights of way attached to the rail, one for passenger service and the other for freight. So, according to that statement, he or she, whoever is writing this, is saying that these rails have been running for over 30 years already, and we were electrified in 1907, they are claiming. The Nichols Company built a variety of detailed shelter houses at the streetcar stops inside the country club district. This one at 69th and Warnell Road was a flight of stairs above the road, and as such, the weather rain on top depicts a man, child, and woman running up those stairs to catch the train. 69th and Warnell, I'm pretty sure, and this did look familiar to me, other than it's missing its shelter and stairs. But I think that we have looked at this bridge, as well as rode over it on the bike on the trolley trail several times. The city did not want to lose the potential value of the freight easement, even though they would have to forfeit $50,000 for refusing to comply. The forfeit they did. So, what is it? How is this Nichols group pushing around the city here? Some gangster type shit. Not real sure. In doing so, the Met caused a legal split of the right of way which ran with the easement area of the tracks. One right of way went to the Met and over the years to various iterations of the franchise operators, culminating with the Kansas City Public Service Company that operated the system at the time the streetcars stopped. The other right of way went to the newly formed Kansas City Public Freight Company, a separate franchise that the city granted for freight service on the line. So a minimal freight presence remained on the line for decades, and it would be decades before the problem would create it would and it would be decades before the problem that would be decades before the problem that would create had to be dealt with. For now, Nichols had his streetcar. Whiz, this is tripping me up more than the AI written dribble on the wackies. So, Mr. Nichols got what he wanted. Sounds like a lot of shady dealings going on with these streetcars. I'm going to read about this photograph before I start the next paragraph. I've been kind of, going back and forth. It kind of confuses. Final inspections before the Sunset Hill line begins the first run of its brief life, serving the Ward Parkway area. The photo is dated 1925. By 1930, the line was discontinued. So here we are, guys, just, completing our final inspections. Totally doesn't look like this railroad and cars were pre-existing at all. I mean, look at the timbers here. Super young trees everywhere. It's like they're moving some land around. So what happened between, the electrification of these, which was in 1907, up to this point, 1925? Yeah, I don't get it, guys. This nothing new looking here to me, as per usual. The Country Club line served the eastern side of the district, but Nichols thought there would be more demand. He pushed for and successfully secured the Sunset Hill line. Nichols had developed the Sunset Hill neighborhood near today's Luce Park under contract with the Ward family. Hugh Ward, a successful young lawyer and son of famed frontier trader Seth Ward, owned significant acreage just south of Brush Creek, including the Kansas City Country Club at the current site of Luce Park. As part of the development plan between the Ward family and Nichols Company, the Ward estate paid the Metropolitan Street Railway Company, the same company that operated the Country Club line to the east, $60,000 in 1909 to extend another line out of Westport toward the southwest, connecting Ward Parkway to the system near Brush Creek. The Sunset Line ran down the south side of Ward Parkway's median, traveling first west, then along the east side of the median as it traveled up the hill south towards Sunset Hill and Mission Hills. Interesting. I had no idea there was ever a line running parallel with Ward Parkway. And by the way, guys, isn't it interesting how we park on driveways and drive on parkways? With the steep grade at the north end of Ward Parkway, the Sunset Hill line would have been a more difficult project than most. But the Metro completed the project in 1910. That's right, it only took them 1 year. By 1913, however, womp, 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 the Metro was already starting to reduce Sunset Hill Line's service. The Metro claimed there were too few patrons. In the wealthy neighborhoods along Ward Parkway, there was little need for public transportation. Imagine that. They didn't need public transportation among the glorious old world mansions along Ward Parkway, you don't say. By this time, the age of the automobile had arrived, and the automobile was king, the mode of choice for most of the country club district's most affluent residents. And then, you could flip this on its head and say that this rail did exist already because, as far as I can tell, the old world, whether it was a necessity or not, it was available to you if you wanted to use it. It seemed like in the old world, everything was done for the people. This is a bit of a long one. I realize we've got just a few paragraphs left here. If you're still with me, I greatly appreciate it. I'm not sure how interesting this is to most, but this is something that I've wanted to look into, so here I am. The streetcar line had served Nichols well in his first development, Bismarck Place. He used it to extend the attractiveness of the country club district to 63rd Street and beyond, as well as along Ward Parkway for a time. By the way, forgot to mention up top here, Mr. Ward jumped into the, how do I say, interesting business dealings as far as these streetcars are concerned. But I have not looked into Mr. Ward yet, but I will be doing so at some point. As part of the system, old names like the Dummy Line and the Westport and Waldo Railway were dropped in favor of the new official name, the Country Club Line, number 56. In 1922, at one of the most prolific periods of development in the Country Club District and the city in general, the Metropolitan Street Railway Company reported that it would be an all-time system-wide record for more than 135 million rider trips, paid fares annually. What? But they just told us up here that the automobile was king. We've got 135 million rider trips annually. The decline in ridership was slow but steady from the late 20s through the years before whoop whoop doo. Ridership picked up a bit during the wars, when gas was rationed and cars were expensive to maintain. I thought the cars were the kings. After the Pratt Whitney aircraft engine plant was built near 95th and Troost in 1942, traffic on the Country Club line increased a bit as the line was a direct link for the hundreds of Kansas Cityans who worked at the plant. But the system would never see numbers like it had around 1920. It wouldn't be until 1945 when ridership would near that level, but by that time, ridership included both streetcars and buses. Still that year, the Country Club line had 43,000 riders. The city began decommissioning some of its service lines in the late 1940s, along with virtually every other system in America. There was no stemming the trend towards the automobile over public transportation. Over 5 routes in the city were still operating in 1951. The 1951 flood took out the line between Kansas City, Kansas and Swope Park. 3 other lines, including the Truce line, which was the most used line in the system, converted to buses in 1955, and on June 23, 1957, the Country Club line made its final run. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm going to wrap this up with this image that I found, said to be at 9th Street, Cable Incline, and Old Union Station. Look at this place. And I'm not sure if this is an image or a artist's depiction. I think down here in the right corner, lower corner, I'm not sure if this is a date. Looks like 1878, but I cannot say for sure. But once again, I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.